Alright, we're going to make a quick video on implementing backup and restore 15 into your module. We're going to try to make this quick and painless. I do tend to ramble on, so hopefully that doesn't become an issue here. Really quick, just a little history. We went ahead and rewrote backup. Backup, in order to allow us to do certain things and do cross-version restores, things like that, it had to be written in a different way. So what we did is we went ahead and implemented a system where each module handles its own data on both backup and restore. The module knows what it's putting out, and the module knows what it's taking back in. So it handles all of its own data. All the information is on the wiki here, so if you come to the wiki you can see what I'm talking about, look over the examples. There's going to be a few modules that are already done that will also work as examples if you're reading by code or learn by code. So real quick, we're just going to go over this. So our backup and restore module, in your BMO class you have a backup and restore method. We no longer use that, or we never used it. We don't plan on using it. They will be removed and deprecated in the future. For maintainability, we went ahead and put the backup and restore functions into their own classes. And so if we go over here and we look at one of the modules where it's been implemented, you can see that there is a restore class and there's a backup class, and you can actually look at here and you'll see the backup class and you'll see the restore class, and we'll actually go through this here really quick. Our backup class is going to hold on to the namespace of the module. So our namespace in this case, because we are in the recordings module, our namespace is FreePBX Modules Recording. It uses FreePBX Modules Backup, that's the backup namespace, as base. And then when we extend, we're going to extend base and then backup base. And you'll see backup base here. It gives us these basically these functions that we can use, and it gives us access to the BMO object, this FreePBX. It does give us access to the backup object, but we're typically not going to use that directly. It will be used through the built-in functions here. Restore base is basically the same. We have the built-in functions that we're using. This gives us an extra item, so a backup object we're not going to really use. The FreePBX BMO, this FreePBX that you can use, and it's going to give us a temp directory. So if we have files on the system that we need to copy out, basically the backup's going to be copied or extracted to a temporary directory that's passed to us, so we know how to pull the files out. In the backup class here, you'll see that that when we back up, we have configs, files, and directories. Our base directory is ast varlibdir. That's like varlib asterisk, yeah, varlib asterisk. And then we go down here, and this is all 100% dependent on your module. This here is written to accommodate the way that recordings handles their files, and so that's how we're pulling the files out. The important part here is the add file part of it. So we're abstracting the data, right? We're trying to figure out where things are and how to handle them. But then we add file. So this is going to add the file to the backup. The file is, or the function goes base name. So you have file.extension. In this case, it would be, recording.wave. The path, the full path to the file, which you're going to see. Up here, base varlib, varlib spool sounds key whatever. So this is where the base is. That's the path that we're going to follow to get to it. So ultimately it's going to be path file name. Our base right here, the varlibdir, is the same as up here, and that is because when we process the restore, this may be different on the restore machine. This may have been changed to something else. We're going to go through and try to figure that out, and we're going to set it accordingly. And then the last one is just an information field. It's the type of recording. This can be blank, or not type of recording, the type of file. It can be blank. If you're in a module with multiple file types, this one only uses recordings, but if you're in with multiple file types, you could actually put the file type or the information here and then process the file differently when you go to restore. For each file that we have, Obviously our base is going to be different. Potentially this is if we have different languages. And so for every directory we want to put the path into this DIRS array. And what's going to happen is we're going to come down here and add directories, and it's going to put a proper directory in the backup's root, and all the files will be relative to that root. Also, we process dependencies. You'll notice that this has a dependency of soundlang. The soundlang will be passed to a restore order, and when it's going through and doing the restore, it won't restore alphabetically. It'll restore in that restore order to make sure that dependencies are handled first. Going over to restore, following the same information here, we have FreePBX modules recordings. That's our namespace, same. FreePBX modules backup base, that's also the same because we're going to the backup module for our extend. But this time we're going to extend base, restore base. Restore base again gives us all these built-in functions, gives us access to these variables. Our restore file. Now we're going to go through our files that we go. So we're going reverse here. So we're getting configs. All the configs that we would pass come out here. All the files we passed come out here. And so we're going to iterate over the files. We check that the type is recording. If this had multiple file types, that would matter. This is just sort of there. It doesn't matter in this case. We have our file path that we're going to pull out of the array that it gives us. Our name test. So you see this name test here. Again, the module is handling its own data. So what it's going to do is it's going to come down here, and it's calling the variable, which is the ast_var libdir, and it's calling the path, and it's asking this if the paths match up or if there's something that we should do to change the path up. Again, if they have a different path set for their spool directory, we'll handle it here, and then we'll put the file back in its place. You can see as right here, the file name is asking if the file name that's in our root directory exists. If so, we're going to copy it. Again, our temporary directory /files, this is our root in our backup, our path that was built, and our file name. And so we're going to take this information here, and we're going to copy it to the new file. Down here we're going to go through the configs. Again, up here we got the configs that were passed to us. Same information. We're going to go through here and we're going to add a recording. Now with your functions, more than likely your adds aren't going to work here, and the reason your add's not going to work is because it's going to generate its own ID. If you're in a module where you use a UUID, it's probably okay, but if you're in one where you're getting an auto increment or something from MySQL, you're going to have to add a new function to handle that, because again, we're used to add, it's creating its own ID. The reason we need to add it back with the original ID is for whatever other module restores, it's going to expect that ID. And if our files go in wrong, or if our recordings go in wrong with the wrong ID, then we're stuck, right? There's nothing we can do. So if you look, I went to I'm going to the class here really quick. We have our basic, see if we can find it really quick. So we have our add recording, right? So this is what you see. You add normally your name, description, blah, blah, blah. And this stuff goes in there, and it would give you a new ID. So if this was the first one, you'd be at ID 1. But maybe we don't want to be at ID 1. So what we did down here is we added a recording with ID. Now we're setting the ID. So insert into recordings with ID, display name. So our file is ID 5 per se, and now it's going to be 5 again. It's still going to be 5. Again, all this done per module, so the module will know how to handle its own data. In this case, I had to add a second function that handled an addition using the ID, so we could maintain our ID. Name test we already covered, so that's the gist of it, right? So, and then if the recording does exist already, then we can go ahead and update it. Now we go through and uninstall and reinstall each module. So if the uninstall script drops the database, which it usually will, this data will be gone. It's never going to exist. It's just, it is what it is, right? It says the data, we've removed it out. So we should never be updating because we basically nuke the data before we start here. The other thing we've done to make it a little bit easier to do the implementation is give a little bit of a skeleton file in here. And so you'll see in the backup folder, you can see examples, and you can copy this backup PHP template or the restore PHP template into the root directory of your module, and it's going to give you this right here. This is sort of the base. You might use some of these, you might not. You might use all of them. You may only use one of them. Some of the modules you'll only use add config, right? So you copy this over and you just change this module name right here to whatever your module is. So say you're doing caller ID, that would turn into caller ID or framework or core or whatever module you're working on. Same with the restore template. It's going to have the base restore stuff here, and all you have to do is change out this module name up here to match the module you're working on. So copy it over, match that module, and then you can start manipulating the data and seeing what you need to do. So let's get a couple examples here. So that was one with the recordings or with files, which is probably going to be the most complex thing you're going to work with, is if you have to start iterating over files. If we take something like PM2, PM2 only has advanced settings. It doesn't have any other settings. And so if we go into backup for PM2, you'll see these are the settings that with their defaults, these are the settings that we're pulling for advanced settings. It doesn't have anything else. And so when we take these advanced settings, we come down and we go through and we see if the setting is set, we add it in there. If it's not set, we add the default in, just so we have all of our settings or all of these settings in the backup. Add configs, we put the configs into the backup, it returns. So now we're going to go to restore. So you've backed it up, now it's time to restore that information. We come over here, we have the same array, the different various settings. We go through the configs that we got up here, this get configs, and we just go through and set the advanced settings, right? And that's it. So this is probably the simplest thing you will deal with. So we went from files, which is probably going to be the hardest, to this, which is going to be as dumb simple as it gets. Let's see, call waiting is it pulls from AskDB. So if we go here to the backup, we're going to go through and again, so you'll notice that the function in here, by the way, is called run backup. What's going to happen is the backup, when it comes to your module, if your module is selected, it's going to call this class and it's going to say run backup, and it's going to pass it the backup ID and the transaction. So if you have settings for a certain backup ID, you can handle those here as well. And then it's given a transaction, which is a unique ID, and that ID can be used to track things like logs or various other things that you might need to keep an eye on. So in this case, we're backing up. We do call waiting, bulk handler, export. Now in this module, we have bulk handler, which goes through and obviously you do your import and export for bulk handler, and it gives us all the data we need. So we went ahead and adapted that to work in this. So I'm pulling the bulk handler stuff that you would pass to your CSV file or whatever for the bulk handler, and I'm adding that as our configs. And then when I go to restore, again, I handle my own data, so I know what the data that's coming back to me is. So I go through the configs that again I got up here, and you'll see my little note here. We're going to pretend we're bulk handler. We're going to go through that and we're going to look, right? And so this is the structure you would normally get from bulk handler, and then we're going to take that structure that we've just built, we're building them into this structure, and then we're going to pass it to the bulk handler import, which is, if you put the CSV in, this would import your information through bulk handler. So in this instance, in this example, we've used the existing functionality of bulk handler, which goes through and does pretty much what we want it to do in this case, and and it just takes the data out and puts the data back in the same way you would do it in bulk handler. And so that's call waiting. If we go to announcements, announcements is another one of those that's going to be configs only. And so announcements, we go to our backup. In our backup, you'll see that there's nothing involved here. We depend on core and we depend on recordings. And then we just add configs, and we're not even processing this out. What we did is that we said get announcements that gets all the announcements, and we are taking what comes from there, which is basically a select all in the database, and we're putting that as our configs. So you notice we're not looping through anything, we're not doing anything fancy here. We took all of the configs out and we shoved them in the backup. And then if we go down here to restore, in the restore, you're going to see again, like I mentioned earlier, run backup, so restore is going to run restore. Anyway, so you're going to see here that we get the configs. For each config, we extract it, which is, so we're just taking and putting obviously the information to keys because it's an associative array. And then we just go through and start adding announcements, description, recording ID, etc., and create announcements. It's sort of as simple as that. All the modules are going to be the same. You're going to decide what you need to pull it out, how you need to pull it out, and then you're going to decide what you've pulled out and how you want to put it back in. And if you have a different version of the module that you're trying to back up and restore from, you can go through and try to adapt the data. Now, one other thing we do is when we're reinstalling the module, so again, we yank the module and put it back, we're going to attempt to put the backed up version on there. And so if you backed up 1501, we're going to attempt to reinstall 1501 if it's available to us. If it's not, we'll install the latest available to us. And so after you run a restore, you may want to update all, and that'll get you to the latest versions and bring you to where you need to be. But it'll also migrate your data as expected. So you're going to put the data back as sort of it was expected when it was pulled out, and you can pull it back up to its to the latest state. So, I mean, let's go back over to the wiki here and see what we haven't covered. I think we've covered most of this stuff. This is explained out down here, what each method does, and that way you know what you're doing. Again, the name should be self-explanatory. And with that information, it's really that simple to put backup or restore into your module.